Just connect. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to Doctors for the Environment's After Hours webinar on greening general practice. My name is Dr. Kate Wiley and I'm so happy that you've come along to share this event with us this evening, whether online this evening or when we're on YouTube later. So yeah, I'm a GP. I work on Kaurna land, otherwise known as Adelaide. I chair the RACGP's Climate and Environmental Medicine Specific Interest Group, and I'm the Deputy Chair of Doctors for the Environment Australia. So basically, I spend a lot of my time thinking about climate change and human health. Just before we start, I want to do some housekeeping. I've written that in the chat. If you're not speaking, can you please mute yourself because it prevents buffering and improves the quality of the recording. We will have time for questions at the end. As we go, if you want to write questions in the chat so that we can, remember what we were thinking about at that time. And I do encourage people to use the chat. It's a great way for us to communicate with each other rather than sort of just sitting by yourself in your study or in your kitchen. This session is being recorded. It's usually recorded with speaker view. So if you're not speaking, you're pretty safe in your anonymity. And I've also posted in the chat the evaluation form. So I really appreciate it if people can fill those out. It does help us, with our quality improvement. And if you're a GP wishing to get points for this evening, then I need you to do that so that I can get your points sorted out for you. Now I'd like to introduce the rest of my panel. I'm very excited by the panel I've got here this evening for us on greening general practice. And I'm introducing in alphabetical order. So first I have Dr. Michelle Hamrosi, who's a GP and lactation consultant in Bateman's Bay. And Michelle's here to share with us her story of being a GP during the Black Summer bushfires and some of the things she experienced there. I also have Dr. Denise Ruth. Hello, Denise. Denise is a GP and public health physician, has done some lecturing at Monash Uni, is in Apollo Bay, and is going to talk to us about greening our clinical practice. And lastly, but not leastly, is Dr. Ross Wiley, who is also a GP, my brother, quite obviously, and chair of the Clinical Advisory Council of the Northern Rivers Primary Health Network. And he's going to talk about carbon auditing in general practice. All right, so I'm going to kick off with our welcome to country and my own share screening. Here we go. And just set the scene. So just give me 2 seconds to be, and yeah, so just asking people to mute if they're not talking, please. So first, I just want to acknowledge that the nation we call Australia is stolen land, and First Nations people have never ceded their sovereignty of their land, and respect is owed to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island nations and First Nations people. Obviously, I want to acknowledge also First Nations connection to country, and that, if we all shared that intrinsic value of caring for country, perhaps we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. I'm calling from Kaurna Yurta, otherwise known as Adelaide, and hello to a group in Ghana is Namani. So Namani to you all, and I hope that you're well, and thank you very much for being here. But to set the scene, so the climate has changed. Climate change is not a future problem. Climate change is a now problem. We know the climate's been changing since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but, we're really, really seeing it now, aren't we? This is a photo taken in southeastern Victoria, down quite near to Michelle, really, about 6 months after the summer fires. And so I'm just trying to find the muted person. After the Black Summer fires, and you can see that this land is really destroyed, that there's not much regrowth. It's pretty denuded. And, we know we're now in a code red for humanity. Last year, the IPCC released the first of their latest round of reports, and Antonio Guterres basically said that, yeah, we are in a code red for humanity, and that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. So there's the muted person. We're currently at 1.1 to 1.2 degrees of global warming. We're going to spend the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees by the end of 2024 and for 2 degrees by the end of this decade. The World Economic Forum says failure to act on climate change is the greatest risk to the global economy. The UN says climate change is the greatest risk to global security. And the World Health Organization says climate change is the biggest health threat facing humanity. And for me, I think the scariest thing of all about climate change is the concept of tipping points, where we change the way our planet works to such an extent that we change its actual physical chemical state. And from there is no return. And, you know, we're looking at passing those, you know, in the present time. And those things are the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet, loss of all the sea ice, changes in the big ocean circulations, the Amazon emitting more carbon than it absorbs, permafrost loss, coral reefs, etc. So, you know, it's all, you know, rather confronting, I have to say. And I just want to play for you all this little graphic from NASA. It shows the global temperature anomaly from 1888 to the present day. There isn't any sound, so we'll just watch. It's only 30 seconds. Yeah, so that's pretty confronting. It's pretty hard to watch, I think. And unsurprisingly, though, of course, this has got massive effects on our health. And just to read the headings, we know we've got problems with extreme heat, with severe weather, with impacts on our food and water supply, with impacts on water quality, air pollution, increasing allergens, changes in vector ecology, degraded living conditions and social inequity. Climate change is a massive social justice issue. Environmental degradation, forced migration, civil conflict, mental health, and loss. And, you know, for us in general practice in Australia, we can't pretend this isn't our problem too. It's very much impacting on our practice now. We see that in evidence in the NJA Lancet countdowns. And this thing on the right is a check issue on planetary health, where we've looked at some cases, if people want to have a look at that. So that's me setting the scene. I know that it sets a rather, you know, hard thing to hear. And now I just want to call on Ross to please give us, you know, 5 minutes of what life's been like for him experiencing the floods in near where he lives in Ballina, or he practices in Ballina. This picture from the advertising for tonight's thing is Ross's practice. So take it away, Ross.
Thanks, Kate. So the floods there, February. So our house didn't flood, and our practice, you can see, didn't quite flood. So we sandbagged the front door and the back door, and yeah, that was a really great thing that we didn't flood. All the other practices in town all flooded though. So for the first few days, there was no electricity, internet, there was no shopping, there was no fuel, there was no money, there was no phones. And so initially it was just, I think because there was no internet, whatever possible overarching emergency services that could have happened couldn't. So there were some really great stories. Our eldest boy, Ted, one of his mates, in a little dinghy saved 35 people in Lismore. And a lot of stories that our local hospital needed to be evacuated. I was at 2 a.m. Just imagine lots of slightly older cars with patients being pushed into cars and taken in the middle of the night up to the local high school. So the high school where our eldest 2 boys go, it's up on a bit of a headland, and that was turned into the hospital for a few days. It was as disorganized and messy as what you would expect. Next to the hospital, there's a small nursing home. Those people were evacuated and they were housed in the primary school where our youngest boy Henry goes. The patients absolutely loved it. If you ever have an emergency in your backyard, the people you want to organise you are teachers. They're amazing. So there were signs. There was, when eventually we could get text messages, there were text messages saying, you know, we need more mattresses, or we need, you know, a cup or anything. And yeah, that was really well done. For the next couple of weeks, just dealing with a community where most people are sort of in shock. Probably 1 in every 4 people of our patients had lost all of their material possessions, cars, houses, you know, all of their material possessions. There was some really awful stories that were coming out of the local evacuation centres. And then for the next sort of, a lot of flood gastro, you know, Cipro 500 BD for 5.7. For the next several weeks, there were, it tended to just be more, just helping people deal with shock. A lot of domestic violence, increased suicidality. Our practice had 4 patients suicide in the last 6 months. The youngest is a teenager, or he was a teenager. And now there's still ongoing, you don't have to scratch the surface very hard, and everyone has, you know, an overabundance of flood stories. There's ongoing talk about, you know, where these flood pod villages should still be, and, you know, it's not in my backyard, and no, you can't put it in the park there because it's just next door to our preschool and our kids are traumatized enough. It's the rains that we had early this week, was just 1 day rain. 1 day here for us, that was 200 mil. The Lismore levee, which is normally at 1 metre, it got to 6.8. It doesn't flood until 11, but there were a lot of people racing down to the levee bank, racing home. That was just 1 day of rain, got it to 6.8, and it's subsided now. And the kids, you know, they hear the rain and freak out. The thing that I'm currently finding, that this must make me sound a bit shallow, but the thing that I'm finding the hardest to deal with currently is the weeds. So there are these sort of creeper vines over the gums, and there are like sapling camphor laurels everywhere, and some yellow weed, which is just sort of taking over the land. So yeah, anyway, lots of ongoing problems. Yep.
Thank you, Ross. And, you know, I think, you know, hearing those firsthand examples are very, very powerful. And, you know, weeds are really important, actually. That's not flippant at all. You know, and the biodiversity crisis is equally bad as climate change. So I think, you know, it sort of speaks to that. And it just sounds like you've got a completely traumatized community, and, you know, must be very traumatizing for you and all the people that you work with and your family. Next, we're going to hear about fires. I think, you know, we've all forgotten about how devastating those fires just recently were. And so, Michelle, when you're ready, please, Michelle, if you could just share your story, and we'd really appreciate that. You're on mute, Michelle.
Sorry, I forgot to do that first. Thank you so much. Yes, very going back now into people's consciousness 3 years ago to talk about the fires. I'm sitting outside to try and escape the noise from my children. So I hope you can all see me okay. So yes, I'm Michelle Hermosi, and I'm speaking to you from Browley, which is Ewan Country, about 4 hours south of Sydney. My husband's also GP anaesthetist, and we have 3 children. And in 2019, 2020, we witnessed, the worst bushfire disaster in living memory in Australia. And 3 years on, I still regularly see patients who have been physically and mentally scarred by this event. And to me, these Black Summer fires really highlight just how much climate change is supercharging our natural disasters. So I just wanted to share a small snippet of my experience. Why isn't it going to the next slide? Oh, there we go. Sorry, there was a bit of a pause there. So on the morning of New Year's Eve, we woke up to an RFS alert of an approaching bushfire. And not long after, just like for Ross, the power and the phones and the internet went down. And my husband, who's on call for Maria, decided he better go to the hospital in case they need him for an emergency. And so shortly after he left, the fire was already burning on the east and west side of my town of Browley, centred there in that picture. So I grabbed the kids and essentials and ran to my neighbours for support. And moments when we're about to run to the beach, the winds changed direction, saving our town, our part of that town anyway, for that day. So my husband came not long after, grabbed us and shoved us in the car and said, "You're coming with us to Maria, whether you like it or not." And so we arrived in Maria. It's about 15 minutes away, and it was really bleak in that town. The air was, as you can see, was really thick with smoke, and everywhere there were people camped in the Riverside Park and alongside the hospital. Barely anybody had masks. The smell of the thick smoke really irritated our eyes, and I ended up getting really bad chest pain after our first night. The shops were closed, stores that were open quickly emptied of supplies. You needed cash. Major highways out of our region to Canberra and Sydney were closed due to active fires, and the only way in and out of our region was via a 9-hour route because of the congestion. You had thousands of tourists trying to evacuate via Cooma to Canberra. And even some petrol stores ran out of supplies. And there was a boil water notice as well for half the Shire. And at the time, Maria Hospital was run on a diesel generator and it was struggling. The CT scanner was out and aircon was turned right down, and it was really hot inside. Across the region, thousands of people had evacuated to beaches, spending hours sitting in the intense smoke with babies and animals and pets. Some people spent the next few nights in their cars or campers or in evacuation centre. Some people spent weeks evacuating. And by the end of that summer, we had evacuated 3 times. Twice, my husband wasn't there. He was sleeping in the car or in a spare bed at the local hospital. So our practice was at Surf Beach, which is about 10 minutes south of Bateman's Bay. And the roads were closed to the practice until about the 6th of January because the area was really badly affected by the bushfires. Thankfully, our practice wasn't burnt. And for the first 2 days of opening our surgery from the 6th of January, we had no power, phones or internet, but we had a walk-in clinic. And so myself and one other colleague who were able to work, we saw bushfire victims and took handwritten notes and listened and offered support and counselling wherever we could. And, I'll never forget those survivors' stories. And I'm sure many of you have heard some of those in the media a few years ago. And over the following months, the standard consult would regularly turn into a double. And I think serving a traumatised community really added a significant mental health load to our general work. And just like Ross said, we have had many suicides as well, and there are lots of patients with longer term respiratory impacts from the smoke. And then we had coronavirus. And so this was another devastating blow. We had this rebuilding effort, communities coming together, relief centre operations, but all of that stopped overnight. And whilst we had the comfort of our homes, many of us who didn't lose homes, but 500 people did in my shire, those who lost their homes, were stuck in these often awful conditions with lacking basic hygiene and storage facilities. And this is an image of my friend Zoe, who lost her home in Cobargo, and they lived in a donated caravan for over a year. So I just want to highlight some examples of how climate-driven events undermine social and environmental determinants of health. As Kate mentioned earlier, how those who are the most devastatingly impacted, those often with the least resources. And we have seen one climate disaster after another with little time for recovery in our nation. And we're underprepared, and so are our health systems. And it's why I'm involved in a new research study. And I hope you don't mind a 30-second plug if I've got the time. We're doing a research project looking to basically improve planning and preparation for infants and young children in bushfire emergencies. Research has shown that we lack adequate planning, and often families faced in emergency situations struggle to get the support they need. I'm sure, Ross, you've got many stories about that in the floods. I've certainly know of many situations where families have really struggled. And this project is currently starting off with a survey. It's open Australia-wide to anyone who supported families during the bushfires, or also anyone who evacuated with infants and young children. We're asking you to complete an online survey, and we're going to use that information to then plug the gaps in planning to better prepare emergency services, individuals, organisations to support families in future disasters. So thank you so much for listening to my story today. And I'll pop the link to our website that has all the information and a link to the survey and lots of resources if you want to print out a poster for your workplace. I really appreciate it. Back to you. Thanks, Kate.
Good on you, Michelle. Thank you so much. And, like hearing both of those stories, it's such a personal account. And I really, what you showed then, Michelle, about climate as a risk multiplier, I think it's really important that we appreciate that. But I also like that you finish with a solution, because, it's very hard not to be overwhelmed by the awfulness of this, because of course it is awful and it is overwhelming. But I think our job now really is to, act. Let's find solutions. Let's do what we can. And so, yeah, if people want to get involved with Michelle's study, I think that would be a fabulous thing. And then the rest of our talk, though, this evening is about action. How can we create solutions to help with climate change? And so I'm going to start just with an overview of greening general practice, 15 minutes on some of the things that we can do. Then Ross is going to share stuff about carbon auditing. And then Denise will talk about things that we can do to green our clinical practice. And so what I'm hoping is that we'll all finish with, some positivity after a pretty, deliberately hard start. But really hoping that you'll all walk out of here pretty empowered. So, Michelle, you just have to stop sharing for me, please. That's all right.
Does that work? Stop share. I just have to click the button. There you go.
Thank you. All right, and I'll just get you to mute for me too, please, honey. All right. And away we go again. So greening general practice, the positive bits. So let's just look. First, I'm just going to look at what the RACGP is doing to green itself, look a bit at our carbon footprint, how we impact on other health services, our impact in our communities, and how we can green the way we practice medicine. So, the RACGP has done some pretty good things in this space. The RACGP released its climate change and human health position statement in June 2019. Very much informed by the work of the Climate Special Interest Group. In that statement, it recognises that climate change is a key public health emergency. It commits to mitigation and adaptation strategies. It says that we should advocate for policies to protect health, and that it considers it important for us GPs to learn about it, communicate about it, and research it. In December 2019, the RACGP declared a climate health emergency, and, you know, did some resourcing around emergency planning and fact sheets. So topics like bushfires, thunderstorms, extreme weather, flooding, mental health and emergencies, how to look at emergencies for GPs, because obviously what we've really seen there from Ross and Michelle is that all GPs need to kind of consider emergency planning. And then at the end of last year, in November 21, the college set a zero emissions target, so committed to reduce emissions by 80% by 2030 and zero by 2040. That's our internal, so the RACGP, the entity's emissions. That doesn't extend to the general practices around the country, but wouldn't that be a good fun thing for us all to do? And basically, they've got some really good environmental, social and governance recommendations. They've updated their sustainability policy. They've now employed a sustainability officer, have committees. So they've got people whose main job it is to look after sustainability within the college. And basically, you know, to see how that we can, you know, adapt our systems and improve the way we do things. When we look at the carbon footprint of healthcare, so this is a really good study by Malik, and it came out in, I think it's the 2014-2015 footprint. And it says that the carbon footprint of Australian healthcare is about 7%, which is more than South Australia, the state I live in. When you look at general practice though, our footprint is only 4%. And, you know, one could be a bit facetious and say, well, you know, we don't do much, let's just go home. But we wouldn't do that because we're responsible. But yeah, so GP is about 4%. And also, we have to remember we take up a big chunk of this pharmaceuticals pie. So pharmaceuticals are 19%, and I reckon we're about maybe half about that. Ross will have a better number than me. It's higher, he says. And then the other thing that GPs are great at is keeping people out of hospital. You know, we practice preventative healthcare. And so a well-resourced general practice workforce, should talk to Mark Butler about this, shouldn't we? A well-resourced GP workforce helps keep people out of hospital and saves our government money. When we look at those three things in a little bit more detail, I've come up with this acronym for greening general practice, which is making it better. And so B stands for your buildings. So, you know, a lot of energy is in buildings. About, you know, 1/4 of greenhouse gases really come from buildings and lack of insulation. So we insulate, we double glaze, we have our white roofs. We look at our energy supply. So, you know, switching your bill to a renewable energy provider is probably one of the simplest and easiest things that all of us can do. It takes about 5 minutes to switch an electricity bill. I'll just put that out there in case anyone wants to do that once we've finished this evening. You know, getting batteries and panels, reducing how much we use, being more efficient. T is for transport, so bike racks and having an EV charger maybe, but just making it, facilitating people using less transport as our patients come to our practice. T is for trees, so shade, and of course, you know, the more biodiversity we can have, the better. E is for the e-scripts, e-communications, e-health, so all of those e-medicines, and R is doing our recycling properly, which I think most of us are a bit slack at. And there's some resources there. This one at the top, Greening Up Environmental Sustainability in General Practice, came out earlier this year from the college, and it's a really great resource. It's got some really good things in there. And then if we look at this one from our, you know, brethren across the ditch in New Zealand, that's a really great document. And obviously there's so much great stuff that comes out of the UK. I mean, the National Health Service is aiming to be the first zero carbon service in the world. And, you know, they are streets ahead of Australia. When we look at that second big wedge, you know, just one side on pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of work that we can really do here. There's not as much data as we need on this area, but we're looking at that now. Obviously, ways to reduce pharmaceuticals is don't prescribe it in the first place. Like, let's look more at lifestyle, let's look more at nature prescribing. Let's look at deprescribing. We all know that when people are on more than, you know, 5 medicines, there's going to be polypharmacy. And we know that that's, you know, we know that that's a problem. We know that there's lots of patients that are on many, many things. And also considering footprints, medications with a lower carbon footprint. And, you know, there's limited data on this. The best data is on inhalers, and I'll go into this in a sec. And the other thing is, when we do prescribe, let's prescribe well. Let's ensure that our patients are compliant. Let's ensure that the medication is doing the job it's set out to do. You know, what's the point of having something that's inefficient? As I said, the most data is on inhalers. And when we look at this lovely infographic on the right, which I think is fabulous, it's all about puffers. So in the meter dose inhalers, the propellants are high carbon emitters, like they're highly potent greenhouse gases. So one little Ventolin puffer is the equivalent CO2 of driving a 4-cylinder car 175 miles from London to Sheffield. So to put that in sort of Australian speak, that's about 300 Ks, or driving from Broken Hill to Mildura, versus like a little Accahaler, that's 4 miles. So, that's just a trip down the road. The power of our pen, the things that we can do. And a lot of, we know that if we manage asthma well, people don't need relievers. So, preventers are good. The other thing, obviously, as I said, is we reduce the hospital burden. So GPs provide long-term patient-centred care. We're all about continuity of care, and we know that is associated with lower rates of hospitalisation, emergency department attendances, and hospital readmission rates. And it reduces mortality, reduced healthcare expenditure, and therefore CO2 equivalence is, effective care provided in GP reduces the need for more expensive hospital care. It means slower growth in health expenditure, and GP stewardship helps manage access to the health system, reduces costs and unnecessary use. So, life was pretty green for us GP Kermits, preventing our unnecessary escalation of care. That hashtag just a GP, I want us to get rid of that. Let's say we're hashtag proud to be a GP, proud to be doing all this great work. And, this is the other thing, GPs are community leaders. Almost 90% of Australians see a GP at least once a year, with 80% of that seeing a GP more than that. And, more people see us than any other sector of the health community. Rural workforce shortage notwithstanding, we're in every community across the country. We're in First Nations communities, we're in culturally and linguistically diverse communities, urban and rural, all socioeconomic strata, you name it, GPs are there, and we are embedded in the communities we serve. And we saw that in Ross's and Michelle's stories. So we are well placed to prescribe and promote non-clinical services and activities to patients which can help address many determinants of health, including climate change. So GPs showing leadership on climate change signals to their communities, to our communities, that climate change is important. It's relevant to our health, and it's treatable. Because I think when you frame climate change as a health issue, the next sentence that follows on from that from any health practitioner is then, well, how do I treat it? So hopefully I've given you a few ideas on that now. Oh, and then the other thing, obviously, is we can green the way we practice. And the first thing we should do is talk about it. The climate health emergency is the most important health problem of our time. We're allowed to talk about it. We talk about everything else, we talk about bowel habits, we take sexual health histories, we ask the most personal probing questions. We're allowed to talk about this. And while, we can talk about the health co-benefits of action, following a planetary health diet, which is plant rich, that reduces the CO2 burden of the high animal diets and is good for us. We can talk about active transport, walking and cycling. This picture on the right is my electric bike. I love it. It is the most fun form of transport you can have. We can practice high value care, avoid ordering unnecessary tests and imaging. The carbon footprint of MRIs is really high, and there's, a lot of work around that. And so everything we do has a footprint. And so do we really need to order it? We need to ask ourselves these questions. Deprescribing, nature prescribing, practicing preventative health. This is what we're really good at. And, also incorporating care, climate into our care plans. So somebody who's got heart disease or diabetes or hypertension, so pretty much, most of our patients, they're at high risk of heat-related illness. Somebody who's got COPD, and so, put it in their care plan. Someone who's got COPD or asthma, they're very high risk when it comes to smoke inhalation. So, put air quality index into their care plan. So incorporate climate into the conversation. And so when you're going through your care plan with people, it normalizes us talking about climate change. And again, disaster action plans should be in everyone's care plan. Everyone should know about that. Okay, so just to finish, so general practice is committed to zero emissions. We've got a low carbon footprint. We can work to reduce the impact of pharmaceuticals and keep people out of hospitals. GPs have reach. We're in every community. Almost 90% of Australians see us, so we're very powerful. We can show leadership in our communities on climate and help shift the narrative around the need for climate action. We can green how we practice medicine, appreciating that we're part of the bigger picture. And, let's remember what I said at the beginning. We're going to spend the carbon footprint for 2 degrees by the end of this decade. Unless we change, let's change. So, now's the time for us to work together to save our beautiful, fragile planet. And remember that I'm cheesy as now, you are the antibodies kicking in as the planet fights its fever. So let's get on and do it. All right, that's a picture of my dog because I love her. And I'll stop sharing now. And yeah, so that's just an introduction. And I hope that shows people that there really is lots that we can do and, that it is applicable to us. So I have a little breath. And Ross, how are you going there? Good. You're just good. All right. And so in your own time, Ross, if you want to share your screen, and we're going to talk about carbon auditing and the numbers.
Right. Great. How am I going? Does that look right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about solutions, carbon auditing, that's a solution. So everything has a carbon footprint and they're easier and easier to add up. Here's a stupid definition. A carbon footprint is the total greenhouse gas emissions caused by an individual, event, organisation, service, place or product expressed as CO2e equivalents. Well, that's the definition, but once you start thinking in terms of carbon, you can't sort of stop yourself adding it up. So someone have a guess of the carbon footprint of a recycled plastic bag. It's good, 7. So 7 kilos of carbon for a plastic bag. An iPhone, 70 kilos of carbon there. Bottle of beer, very cheap. Only 1/4 kilo of carbon dioxide to make a bottle of beer. What about airplane travel? So a return trip to New Zealand, about 300 kilos of carbon. A return trip to LA, 1,200 kilos of carbon. A return trip to the UK, 1,600 kilos of carbon. So most things now can be assessed in terms of their carbon footprint. And it's not just goods and services. It can be averaged over businesses or large corporations or countries. So 2 months ago, when Pakistan had those huge floods, 1/3 of the country underwater, a question which we should be asking ourselves revolves around their carbon footprint. The average carbon footprint of a Pakistani person is less than 1 ton, which is really small by comparison. Nigerians, last week, a further big flood in Nigeria, a further 1.3 million people displaced. The average carbon footprint of a Nigerian, again, really, really small, 0.6 tons. Compare that to us. So in the G20, and that's looked at annually in the Climate Transparency Report, the average for a person in the G20, you can see down the bottom of that graph, is nearly 8 tons per capita, whereas we Australians, we take the cake and we eat it. We eat it all. So 22 tons of carbon for us, for Australians. That Climate Transparency Report has been around for a long time. It's a really comprehensive document and it's released annually, and you can trace it back to 97 in the Kyoto Protocol. And the other big thing that came out of that, as Kate alluded to, was the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So you can measure everything using this protocol, and it divides emissions into scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Basically, scope 1 emissions are your power plants, your coal power plant producing electricity and other gases. Scope 2 emissions, they're your electricity lines taking your supply from one place to another. Scope 3 emissions are basically everything else. The NHS summed up that well for health professionals. And when you look at that graphic there, their scope 1 emissions, maybe they have some on-site fossil fuel use in big burners or something, but anesthetic gases, but their scope 2 emissions, electricity, and scope 3 emissions, these things that we in general practice can readily understand. So this is the thing to understand. If you can measure it, you can change it. I was talking about taking that slide out because it's a bit political, but I think Australia will go down the line of other countries in terms of its taxation system. It's more and more countries are doing it because it's an equitable way of taxing your population. But as general practitioners, we're not really used to thinking about carbon equivalence. We're more used to thinking about the things in that graph, again, which Kate alluded to, malnutrition, waterborne diseases, climate refugees. So climate refugees, so I'm still dealing, excuse me, not me, but we here in Ballina are still dealing with thousands of climate refugees. So we put in for a master's student who I've only met online. Her name is Maverick DeVoe, and she's doing a master's in environmental auditing through the School of Sustainability at Sydney Uni, and is supervised by a couple of very heavy duty which is the most cited academic currently. So worldwide is the most cited currently. And practices carbon footprint. So I just had a thing on my.
Sorry, Ross, you're buffering a little
but
bit.
not emissions. Yeah, Kate, I'm not quite sure. I just had a message coming up on the screen saying that my connection's unstable, but I don't quite know.
Okay, we'll just keep going, I suppose. I'll take my video off because that'll just decrease things.
So no emissions for us. Our scope 2 is our electricity. And scope 3 is basically everything else. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
you.
It's okay, Ross, we can hear you.
Cool. So it's bizarre. Well, it was for me, what can be added up to look at your scope 3 emissions. So all of your printing costs, the defib pads, the thermometers, your uniforms, and then the in basically 4 to 5 equivalent general practice of 100,000 tonnes. So that's 100,000 tonnes for the practice, the non-clinical section of being a general practitioner, or general practice, the noun. But it doesn't include your scrubbing habits, your radiology habits. It doesn't include the way you act as a general practitioner, general practice, the verb. There are a lot of calculators that you can use to add up the carbon footprint of your building. This one's carbon neutral, this one carbon positive Australia, and they all look at tables, like old style log tables. So each country annually produces a set of tables, and basically you plug into the table how much of whatever you're using, and it spits out the CO2e equivalent for that process. I used a few of these calculators. They all undersold our general practice, but within cooey of each other. One that came out pretty well bang on was the UK one. And it was so close that it made me think about a few things. Firstly, that being a GP in Australia must have a fairly similar carbon footprint to being a GP in the UK. And the next thing I thought of was, well, we should have a calculator as good as that over here. So our carbon footprint then may well be in the order of 20, maybe 25,000 tonnes of carbon per full-time equivalent for the non-clinical section of our practice. And that's a fair bit by comparison with some other countries, for instance, Switzerland, where they do it for 15 or 16,000 tonnes per full-time equivalent. Getting back to measuring it, and you can change it. So the NHS looked at theirs and they've reduced it by 26% based on 1990 levels. This graph, again, from the NHS, I'll draw your attention to the third column across from the right, primary care. So the two big things on that graph, the 2750, that's the scripts that people are writing, and the 767, that's your puffers, meter dose inhalers. When you look at them as a percentage of the total of that 5770, that's where that figure that many of us will have seen cited of 60% being our clinical practice versus 40% being our non-clinical practice, GP the noun, GP the verb. Another few things that made me feel more comfortable about using that NHS data to further influence us is the global asthma prevalence cross-sectional study. I was surprised to find that Australia, we've got the high, we come up number one on that study, but the UK, they came out third, and our rate of asthma prescribing is quite similar. We have done a lot already as in the case, and I like that RACGP greening up environmental sustainability document. One of the things though in that document is the old pie chart from the NHS, just looking at the non-clinical side of general practice. Well, we don't use that much gas, and our patient travel, well, we drive around in large SUVs with one passenger in it. So I think the patient travel for us would be much higher. I think our gas would be much lower. I'd like to see a pie chart that includes both the non-clinical and the clinical for us to think about our CO2e of being a general practitioner in Australia. So I came up with this. This is an estimate and it's not right, but it's probably not too far wrong either. And you can see that there are 6 larger pieces of pie on that graph. So there's your scripts, your inhalers, there's your staff and your own travel, there's your electricity, the way you investigate, and the way your patients come and see you. Those are 6 directions that we can focus on to think about how we can address, how we can lower our carbon footprint. So I'm thinking, what about if we had a plugin, a software plugin for our GP software that interfaces with best practice or whichever GP software you're using, and it comes up with an icon on your screen, much like Doctor's Control Panel or PenCat Topper, and it has those 6 axes on it. And as a practitioner improves their practice along that axis, or as they go through modules, demonstrate that they've learned more about those modules, then you eventually go towards the center until, if you come in to inside 3 rings on all those, well, just on the back of an envelope calculation, I think you have likely reduced your carbon footprint by about 40%. So let's just look at those 6 axes. So scripts, well, yeah, Kate alluded to that 19% in anonymous paper, 19% of Australian healthcare's percentage of our carbon cost. This is PBS data. So look at the top 2 scripts prescribed in Australia. So Crestor, 7.8 million scripts, Lipitor, 7.5 million scripts. Just imagine if that little plug-in computer program that you had running spoke to the GP in real time, suggesting that one of those products had a much lower carbon footprint than the other. I think that would do a lot of things. I think it would change prescriber habits, but eventually, and if more and more of us got on board with it, it would be sending a very clear signal and price signal back to Big Pharma, and would potentially start to change habits of big pharmaceuticals. It's not just those two. If you're looking at this list of Australia's top 30, there's heaps of double ups and triple ups. We could be compiling information and feeding that back to general practice. Kate, again, talked about deprescribing. Again, in the NHS data. So 1 billion prescriptions dispensed in primary care alone, estimated 10% being overprescribed, that is not needed or wanted by the patient, potentially more harmful than beneficial. And I think Kate also alluded to that a fifth of hospital admissions are the result of adverse effects of prescribed drugs. Well, we're working a bit in that space, and it was good to see the deprescribing chapter in the oldies book, in the silver book. But it would be great to be re-looking at how that information is portrayed in terms of making practitioners aware of their carbon footprint. And, you know, talking about budgets, Tim Chalmers would love us. So 9% per annum is the rate at which the PBS is going up, $13.8 billion. And I was looking back, even as far as 2010, it's been 9% year on year. With Australians paying more for pharmaceuticals than other similar countries. I think we are 30 or 40% more than the same scripts in New Zealand, and 60% more than in the UK. So that's the scripts. Access to inhalers. Yeah, as Kate said, metered dose inhalers. You breathe it in, but when you exhale it, that gas is coming out unchanged and is a potent greenhouse gas. Just looking on the left-hand side of this infographic, you can see methane, you know, cows, you know, 27.9 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide, meaning that they're 27.9 times better at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. Look across there at norfluorine and apifluorine. So we need those discussions with pharmacists. We need discussions with the local respiratory physicians. We need little scripted conversations that we can discuss with patients when they come in. And obviously it's not going to be something that we can change all at once or for all patients. You know, a lot of kids, you're not going to be able to change their inhaler, or people with really low respiratory function. But of that, perhaps up to 11% of our carbon budget, 9 or 10% of that might be fair game. Third axis there would be our travel. As we all know, we are quite behind in other countries in terms of adopting electric vehicles. This is a US site, electricpledge.org. It's got some great info on it, but basically getting people to pledge, to sign on, stating that their next vehicle is going to be electric. We could have a site like this. And it doesn't have to be GP owned. There's the Australian Electric Vehicle Owners Association. And we could be talking with the president, who's, yeah, who I could talk to him about this. And so on your wheel, on your computer, you know, you might go up one rank towards the middle for pledging that you're going to go electric. If there's 2 practitioners maybe in your practice, then you've gone up 2 wheels. How many GP electric vehicles do you think have to be in a car park before all the secretaries decide they're going to buy electric vehicles? Axis 4 would be investigations. And there's some great stuff by some really amazing, intelligent people in Australia working on this stuff. As Kate alluded to, if you look down in findings there, the CO2e for an MRI scan, 17.5 kilos of carbon, compared to a CT, 9.2 kilos of carbon, compared to half or one for a chest X-ray or a half a kilo for an ultrasound. What if on your program in the top of your screen, it was adding up your carbon cost and adding up your carbon cost for pathology ordering? 82 grams to order a full blood count, 116 grams to order a coags. And it would be such a good incentive. Dr. Braithwaite's study, amazing study, saying that 30% of our clinical care is wasteful and that a further 10% is harmful. It's really going to put downward pressure on that. So the fifth axis there, GP, the non-clinical part, there's some really great resources already there for that. And some from RSCGP, but the lion's share of it, as Kate again alluded to, is just getting your practice to pay the levy. I think when I did it was $10 to go to renewables, and there's that 8% of that pie gone. The sixth axis then, lastly, is patient travel. This is beach data, which I think the last year of collation was 2015, 2016. If you look across to the right-hand top column, then you can see that prescriptions were 13.5% of GP presentations. Test results, there were 10.2% of presentations. And obviously telehealth isn't going to suit the majority of GP presentations, but it might well be that telehealth is something that we can safely do for our patients for, I don't know, I'm thinking 22%, but maybe 20-25% of our presentations, with that corresponding 20-25%, meaning another 3 or 4% off our carbon wheel. So how can we bring the whole of general practice along on this journey? I think general practice is going to commit when they understand that benchmarking and auditing is really going to make a difference. And one thing that we could say is that our aim, this is an achievable aim. Our aim currently is a 43, not 80 of the college, but 43% reduction of our general practice on our 2019 footprint by 2027. And that would be an outcome of 0.6% of Australia's total, which would be 3.2 million tonnes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. That's excellent. And, you know, like, as you say, you know, we've just had a government pass an interim reduction target of 43% by 2030, you know, and we can be part of making that happen. You know, we can show the way to how to do it. And every time we do it and our patients become aware, they get to go, my GP is doing this really cool carbon thing. Maybe I'll, you know, get on that bandwagon. Maybe I'm in on that as well. All right. And our last speaker for tonight is Denise. How are you going there, Denise?
I'm going well.
Great.
I'm just looking for, on my Zoom screen, the one that's on my computer. I'm just looking for the screen button on Zoom. It's not.
Do you mean the share screen button? It should be in green at the bottom.
Am I still on? No, I am in.
Yeah.
I know I need to make this. No, I can't see my share button. It's disappeared.
You had it before.
I know. I shall get out of this and see.
Oh, yeah. Someone's just written in the chat, try exiting full screen. Because sometimes when the full screen takes over, you can't see your own stuff kind of behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going out.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, so So I'm in Zoom cloud meetings. It says leave meeting, which I'm not doing. And I can get my own screen up, but I can't on the Zoom. It's the Zoom thing that's not kind of working for me.
So if you press on the share, so you pressed on the share screen button.
I can't see this at share screen button. I've got Zoom and I've got.
So if you click on the Zoom button, is that the blue Zoom square?
Yeah, I've done all that.
So if you click on that, what happens?
I get Zoom join a meeting actually, and I get Zoom that I'm talking. So.
I'm sorry, Denise. Like it should be.
Am I there twice? Let's have a look at the gallery.
You're only there. There's one Denise Ruth.
Oh, okay, that's the problem. I need to join again. So it's saying leave meeting. Sorry about this. It was all working before.
That's all right. It's always the tech. There's always tech issues. It's just the rule of the universe. I think we're all quite used to that. All right.
It says join a meeting. So what I might do is just join again.
Okay.
Go to the email and
yeah.
I'm also it's just getting connected.
Should we just give you a couple of minutes, Denise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm joining now.
Okay.
Okay, so there I am, and share screen. So my screen will be, and screen I want is this one. And go to.
Great. There you are. So if you want to start presenting from there, and we'll be perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay. These things happen. It's all good.
Okay, so I'm speaking on greening general practice from the verb point of view. So patient care in the practice and natural environment. The slide I've got up is of a group of GPs who are all passionate. Some of them are here. There's this is our WhatsApp Green GP group meeting together at Tapas Bar, and what we do is just share our enthusiasm, our ideas, support each other, and it includes the Executive Director of Operations at our local PHN, which is Westvic. And so, you know, things are really starting to move along, both for each of us individually and also as a group and for the PHN. The lower picture's Therapeutic Gardens book. That's Bernard's book that is one of the resources he's using for establishing a therapeutic garden of his own general practice, and they're the seeds that he's going to be planting. Go ahead. So, okay, so planetary health is the health of human civilization and the state of natural systems and on which it depends. And as Kate was saying, the intricate and delicate relation that human health has with nature is becoming increasingly clearer as the systems are degraded. So the kind of picture I'm bringing to this presentation is this one. Planetary health informs general practice. And there's three main elements. There's climate change, there's human health, there's environmental health. And then where these overlap is where we take our GP action for the way we practice. So my talk will fall into three parts. how to incorporate climate into how we practice medicine, which is this axis here mainly. An introduction to the health benefits of interacting with nature and nature prescribing, so this axis here. And then how to develop our GP community outreach and advocacy and activism. There's no time really to discuss the environmental degradation by humans and the combined with the impacts of climate change, which is this axis here. I think that'll be for another webinar. What do you think, Kate? So this one's just global heating raises the temperature of air, land and water. And the reason I'm showing it is because patients and probably some doctors have trouble getting their head around the small average temperature changes. So talking about warming rather than heating, and in terms of average temperatures can be perceived as small for the public, but any rise in the average temperature leads to a rise in the number of days that are extremely hot, and to impacts that occur over time, gradually, not at an increasing speed, like sea level rise, acidification and warming. So this slide here, you'll probably see around the traps because the College of GPs has used it. And so at the bottom, we're looking at the health outcomes. And this slide's really showing the cascade of events, again, which has been demonstrated earlier in the talk, so I won't say much about it, but the exposure pathways are multiple, and they're all often happening at once from the effects of climate change. And then the health outcomes are multiple. And that's why communities are being affected by these multiple problems. So into the consulting room, let's look at patient-centred prevention and management of health impacts of climate change. So, I want to go back, can't go back, it's all right. So the recent, the Czech program in August is on planetary health, and it basically has 5 case studies which are well worth looking at for upskilling on the management of prevention and management of these conditions. So there's Itsuki's 34-year-old guy with asthma, short of breath on a day of thick smoke haze. These are people you're likely to see in your own rooms. Kira, 35-year-old Aboriginal woman, febrile illness from mozzie bites or cleaning up after major flooding. Kate, 32-year-old, tired, sweaty, nausea, muscle cramps, and her 8-month breastfeeding baby is listless the day after she ran 10 kilometres during a heat wave. Ella, 24-year-old woman, asks about surgical infertility options as she's decided not to have children because of climate crisis. And a 65-year-old Pacific Islander man with knee osteoarthritis and obesity attends for pap test results after elevated fasting glucose test. So, that just shows the range of conditions that are impacted by climate, and that we need to kind of get our heads around. So effectively meeting these challenges is made easier by building on our clinical knowledge and skills through CPD, basically, for the climate-related aspects, organising our practice processes to identify at-risk patients and provide what they need, remembering that GPs are trusted voices to educate our patients and community. We're still the most trustworthy profession in Australia and the world from the Ipsos poll 2021. And GPs are flexible. We meet emerging health challenges across our whole career, and COVID is one of the biggest. Heat-related illness is the most direct impact of climate change. So, it affects individuals differently throughout their life course, depending on lifestyle, socioeconomic circumstances, location, and medical conditions. But the key thing is that health effects of extreme heat from climate change are diagnosable, they're treatable, and they're preventable with improved preparedness and avoidance of exposure. So this slide, we don't need to go through the whole management, but basically this just demonstrates the clinical knowledge and skills needed, that we need to be able to recognise and manage the different stages of heat illness, from mild self-limiting illness with advice, heat exhaustion requiring treatment in our rooms, and heat stroke requiring basically stabilisation and transfer as a life-threatening emergency. Anyone can be affected, and if you just run your eye down here, you'll see it covers an awful lot of our patients, and their needs are going to be different. So that means we need to kind of keep honing up and using our practice-based strategies to prevent adverse health impacts. So working with the practice team, digital, physical and community resources, identifying vulnerable patients and working with them and their families to reduce risk, tailoring education and advice, collecting and using patient resource materials and guidelines. So this is something that, you know, we're doing all the time, particularly registrars and more recently graduated GPs. Using telehealth so people can avoid travel, adapting the practice environment for cooling, developing a practice heatwave plan linked to the state heat health plan and local community resources, contributing to local disaster planning, emergency responses and community recovery. So we had 2 case studies earlier, reducing the carbon footprint of practice and healthcare. And I was pretty inspired by Ross's presentation on that. So there's lots to do. Okay, so we just look at the principles of sustainable healthcare. This is coming out of the British Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, which is an NGO that's basically completely focused on this work. So it's familiar stuff. So firstly, prevention, patient self-care and stopping low value care can reduce unnecessary clinical care, and Kate made that point. And secondly, when clinical care is necessary, using the high value care and low carbon alternatives can reduce the environmental impact. And the example that is the theme for the evening is sustainable prescribing. So just broadening this a bit with our practice strategies, making sure we keep our records of allergies up to date, using digital tools, considering, you know, reviews, reviewing polypharmacy, and that basically, and that includes using, if we look at it, so that's all familiar to you. So optimising, an example for optimising effectiveness and reducing environmental impact of asthma inhalers is use an asthma plan to optimise treatment, address overuse of treaters, which is common, underuse of preventers, which is also common, and poor technique, which is, you know, about a third of patients, to increase effectiveness and reduce waste. Switch to low environment impact MDI to the dry inhalers. So if it's appropriate. So okay, so we come back to the schema I'm working with, then I want to talk now more about human health and environmental health aspects of it. So promoting health through green spaces in the natural environment. The top images are of an exhibition I went to in Melbourne the other day, that climate art emergency action. It's a group of artists who dedicated to increasing awareness of the public about the climate emergency. This one was nature-based, and what it was that it's a series of artworks on trees where the artists respond to their favourite tree from the City of Melbourne's urban forest of 92 identified trees across the municipality. So the notion of an urban forest is pretty cool. These 2 trees are in separate parts of Royal Park, which is behind the Children's Hospital, very big park in the centre of Melbourne. And the water features treat and cycle the stormwater naturally in the urban environment here. And the lower pictures are ferns that I photographed on my walk in Mates Rest, which is an ancient rainforest walk at near Cape Otway last week. So if you look at the evidence, evidence is kind of gathering over the last 10 years or more, and nature. And so we look at time with green space and in nature. The evidence is pretty strong that there's significant reduction in all-cause obesity, mortality, all-cause mortality, and cardiovascular related things, improved pregnancy outcomes, and improved function of the immune system. A study in general practice in Holland showed that the more green space there was in 1 kilometre radius, the lower the prevalence of disease. Even a view of trees helps speed up recovery and reduce the need for painkillers after surgery in ICU and orthopaedic wards. Access to green space is limited. We know that by income, ethnicity and gender. Women don't feel safe. Poor people don't get such leafy suburbs. Ethnic groups tend to also have housing issues. But increasing access to green spaces actually reduces the health inequality because it's of more benefit to the people who are lacking it. There's a lot of work done around mental health, and quite a bit of it's summarised in the 2021 WHO report. And that'll be a familiar list: improved quality of life, reductions in stress, increased sense of worth, improved social skills. People actually do gain better mental health and higher levels of well-being when they move to greener area. Dense vegetation and shrublands were the only green space that appeared to have no or even negative effects for some people. And for blue spaces, benefits of exposure to the coast in particular showed consistent positive mental health impacts, especially mood and affective disorder, more so than inland waterways. And of course, there's co-benefits for community, the strengthening community groups, and for nature, reducing air pollution, heat island effect in the cities, and environmental stewardship everywhere. So the positive effects of green spaces, when you analyse them, they seem to be what seems to cause them is the opportunity for more physical activity, social connection, meaningful activity, and also direct impacts of nature. And there's several theories about pathways for that we don't need to go into now. Okay, so planetary health promotion in the consultation. So you can see that we've moved away from the medical, the pointy end of the medical treatment of climate-related conditions to, health promotion, which is really, really important. Person-centered care and patient self-care are important. Healthy lifestyle, diet, physical activity and transport. Minimising harmful substances, but also hazards. For instance, the humble helmet for preventing head injuries when you're doing your active transport, and masks, like people who are potting up at potting plants at home or in land care nurseries, wearing masks to protect from Legionella, and just wearing masks now to protect from COVID. Exeter University has some great stuff on nature prescribing. In Britain, they tend to do social and nature prescribing by the GP referring to a link person, link worker, on the grounds that GPs are busy doing the clinical stuff and that other people can do the linkages. But in Australia, I think it's a good idea to consider link workers and whether your local health services have scope to expand that role or join that role with things, or local, and also just our own knowledge of local activities. Volunteering amplifies all the benefits of health, being in nature. There's Victorian Environment Friends Network has a click-on thing to find local networks in your area, and modelling, of course, being seen in that community, being involved in stuff, riding your bike to work. So what is available in your area? You'll be surprised what you find. There's just so much going on out there. For example, in Apollo Bay, this is the coastline, the Southern Otways Landcare Network, which has actually brought together a whole lot of smaller groups, like you know, the Shrub Club that plants, that does the planting, you know, growing from the seed to the seedlings and ready for planting. Habitat restoration surveys, edible gardens groups, which is a kind of umbrella where there's community gardens, school gardens, composter, permaculture. There's bees groups, there's lots of education. And the ocean group's particularly interesting. It's very innovative in doing surveys of sea life and stuff. Wildlife Wonders and the Conservation Ecology Centre are amazing. They have a tourist and ecotourism facility, an educational facility, and they have a research facility. And Great Ocean Road Health, it has group walks, swims, residents garden and the aged care. It's very wellness focused. And during COVID, they did a virtual Great Ocean Road walk, rode around from Torquay, right around to the South Australian border pretty much. And so one staff person would actually do a segment of the walk, and everybody else would be getting their, you know, their points up to equate to that amount of exercise. And they did it for 2 years in a row. There's the Great Ocean Walk, of course. There's the sailing, surfing, fishing. And then there's events. We have a big marathon. We have, you know, the big bike ride, another bike ride, Storm the Bay swim, and lots of festivals. Then there's Southern Otway Sustainable, 100% renewable energy for the community. It's really working through all the possibilities of grids and big batteries and all that stuff. But we've already got a lot of solar. And Otway's Climate Emergency Action Network, that's the political group against seismic testing. There's natural gas not natural gas, it's methane gas in Otway Basin under Bass Strait and right across to the Apostles, 12 Apostles. So we've had protest marches in Melbourne, signed petitions, and done submissions to the panel that's advising the government on whether to approve having an LNG gas tanker parked off Corio Bay residents in Geelong. So volunteering has multiple benefits, which just amplifies benefits from being in nature pretty much. Learning new skills, which can increase employability, practicing social skills, building supportive social networks, structuring time, empowering people, which can then be better at self-care and less dependent on health services. And the Victorian Environment Friends Network, there was a fabulous young people's webinar, and they mentioned the value of intergenerational collaborations and mutual learning, which is also what I've enjoyed, just doing stuff with the example is the planetary health check, and Julian Cassar, who is newly fellowed GP, he's the one who basically coordinated putting together of the check, and then there were 5 different groups of authors who wrote cases. Julian also had the idea of wanting to have wanted to do planetary health webinars for fellow registrars when he was registrar, and I joined in with him on that, as did Jenny Huang, who's in our group here. So that's kind of intergenerational as well. It's a great way of working, and it helps shift ideas from mentoring to collaborative partnerships, and which is what we're doing with our patients as well. We're moving away from giving advice to working together. Okay, so moving on now to community action, advocacy and activism. How do you decide your action?
I'm sorry, Denise, I'll just flag that we're at 23 minutes now.
Yeah, that's fine. Is that okay? Is that the 3 minutes that I figged around?
Yeah, so no, I started when you started. So
okay.
just flag that we're there now.
Okay, well, that was the last slide. Basically, it was, this one's a summary slide, which we can skip. If I can go back, probably can't go back, but what it says is what deciding on what action you want to take yourself, because it's a journey and just working out what you want to do next. What do you enjoy doing? What needs to be done, and what skills do you have? And how that comes to be together, you can choose what actions you're going to take. I can just leave it at that. I can give my examples, but no need to. And then there's the summary one. So the summary page, but I don't think we need that. Do you?
I think it's a really lovely way to finish, actually, Denise, that just, shows that, GPs do have agency in this space, and that's a really important, final thing to finish with. So look, thank you so much, Denise. I'm just going to post for the 3rd time the link to the evaluation form in the chat, because I'm always trying to get people to do them. And we're almost at the past mark now, but like, if anybody has any questions, if anyone wants to come off mute and start talking and discuss some of the stuff that we've heard tonight, because it's been a really rich and valuable session. And really thank you everybody who's been here tonight and made the time to come along. I know we're all very busy people, and yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to stop recording now so we can all feel permission to speak freely, basically.